Really? Devin the Dream Haney gets ranked number 1 at 147 pounds, despite 0 fights at 147 pounds. Your boy Ego will break down the news in this video. You really don't want to miss it. So make sure you guys subscribe. So the WBC has updated their ranking system for 2025. And your boy Ego has obtained the information, which I will show you on screen in the next 30 seconds. And it has Devin Haney as the number 1 ranked person at 147 pounds. So make sure you follow me at Boxing Ego 1, social media. All my options and links are in the description. Made this graphic for you. You see it. Devin Haney is now ranked number 1 at welterweight, which is a 147-pound division within the WBC organization, right? To prove it to you, here's a screen grab. This is from the WBC. They updated it on February 7th. So the other day, welterweight category 147, glamour division in boxing, and the updated list has the number 1 spot. I'm coming for the number 1 spot. Loda. Huh. Devin Haney. All right. Soleiman Sissoko, then it's Conor Ben. But we don't really have to worry about some of these other guys because they have fights. Sissoko has a fight. Conor Ben has a fight with Chris Eubank Jr. in another division, etc., etc. So I really, in this video, wanted to focus on Devin Haney being ranked number 1. As we know, Mario El Azteca, the Mexican Warrior, is the champion of the division. And he just fought recently on Jake Paul, Mike Tyson card and had a tough fight, but he retained his title, right? My caption reads, Devin Haney gets ranked number 1 at welterweight with no fights at welterweight, 147 pounds, after the Ryan Garcia fight was overturned and he didn't fight Sandor Martin, which was his mandatory. Instead of, he became a champion in recess at 140 pounds. So I want to know from the fans what they have to say. Now, as far as your boy Ego, I got a lot to say. And I told you at the beginning of the year, it's going to get dark for a lot of content creators. Clickbaiting, lying, inconsistent. That is out. Telling the truth, being transparent, growing the sport of boxing. That is what's in. I said it. There's a lot of low quality content online for boxing. Rushed thumbnails and low quality thumbnails and bad audio, bad visuals. Let's get the sport back so it's represented right, instead of like rushing out content and then the content is not even true. It's not realistic. The spins and the takes aren't realistic, etc. So the Haneyacks, this is going to be really funny. And I told you, let's start holding, even myself, content creators accountable for the content they put out. I think it's only right. So just pay attention to who says what, when they said it, and then a short time later, I promise you it's going to be different things. In comes the inconsistency. I distinctly, and it's not just content creators, it's fans as well. And I distinctly remember I did a video and the WBC had rated Errol Spence number 1 at 154 pounds. They were trying to make the Fundora fight. So obviously it's before they came out and said that the Fundora fight was not happening with Errol Spence next. However, that's what they were trying to get done. The WBC at the time rated Errol Spence in that number 1 spot. There were a lot of fans who left comments and they were like, man, Ego, this is some BS. I can't believe this. Errol Spence, he hasn't fought in a minute. Errol Spence, he's coming off of a loss. Errol Spence doesn't deserve to be rated number 1, etc., etc. He was a champion with the WBC belt and he unified titles, but he lost to one man, Terrence Bud Crawford, who's a pound for pound great and multi-division champion, right? So now watch the Haney content creators and the Haney fans double back and somehow justify this move from the WBC as it pertains to Devin Haney. So when it's a PBC fighter, you notice a pattern. When it's a PBC fighter like Errol Spence and he got rated number 1 in a division he hadn't fought in and he was coming off of a loss and a performance that left more to be desired, you had the Haney content creators and fans and they're like, this is some BS. How did he get that over other people? Fast forward to the future, you got the welterweight champion, and then right underneath it is Devin Haney, and he's really arguably coming off of a loss to Ryan Garcia that was overturned. I get it, Ryan popped dirty, so it's like the fight didn't happen. But the fight did happen, and we watched it, and that wasn't Devin Haney's strongest performance, to say the least. So to go from that to somehow being ranked number 1 is a bit weird. Now, Devin was the WBC champion after defeating Regis Prograis. So maybe I don't work for the WBC, so I don't know what their logic is, but maybe their logic is he was a champion in recess and he had the WBC belt at 140 pounds. So now, you know, he has carte blanche in this new division he hasn't fought at yet, right? But to me, they should change the rules, or that's a bit weird, because he was required to fight his mandatory, Sandor Martin. They paid step-aside money for Sandor Martin, and he willingly stepped aside to allow Haney Garcia. Then Devin initially loses to Ryan Garcia, right? Initially loses the bout to Ryan Garcia. And Sandor Martin still wants his shot. The WBC ordered Devin to fight Sandor Martin. He didn't do it. And then wrote a letter and said, hey, I'm not ready to fight, blah, blah, blah. They made him a champion in recess. So he didn't fulfill his mandatory obligation, which Top Rank won the purse bid, and they were trying to stage the fight. So in lieu of Devin, you know, becoming a champion in recess, that fight went to Alberto Puello, who's now fighting for the title against Sandor Martin on Tank Davis undercard, right? So how did Devin get the number 1 spot and he didn't even fight his mandatory and he opted not to, you know, and he hasn't fought this division and arguably he's really coming off of a loss. Very, very weird. But again, I can't wait to hear the Haneyaks try to justify it when they were just mad at Errol Spence for being off of a loss, similar situation, and being rated at 154. Now, back to what Ego has said. For these reasons and the way boxing is structured with a ton of politics, boxing is all about who you know, grease and palms and backdoor deals and things like that. So depending on what promoter you're with and what they got going on, people will squeeze you in. It's like a nightclub and you know the club owner, so the bouncers let you in, right? Boxing works the same way. So when I tell you these belts don't really matter, if people resonate with the fight, they're going to pay for it. So if there's no belt on the line or a made up belt, if people like the fight, like it could have been Canelo versus Jake Paul, it still would have been a big fight, even if there's no belts, because it's a novelty fight. And I've said this for years, times are changing in boxing. This is why. This is why, where you can have a guy like Devin Haney come off the Ryan Garcia performance, do nothing at 147, and then somehow become the number one guy off of that. Now, if he fought Regis Prograis and then decided to move up to welterweight off of that performance, and then decided, yo, I want to be a welterweight, I can't make 140, and there was no Ryan fight, to me that would make a bit more sense. But to come from these images and scenes to now, somehow you are rated number one for the Barrios belt, for me, it sounds a bit weird. I don't work for the WBC, so I don't know how they tabulate stuff. And my other thing is, what's the point? What's the point? Because Turkey has pretty much outlined Devin's next couple of fights and Ryan's next couple of fights, pending some outcomes. He said, yo, Devin is fighting against Jose Ramirez. Should he be successful? Should Ryan, who's on the same card, be successful versus Rolly? Then they're going to fight each other in a rematch and then do a trilogy. So what's the point of ranking him? Now, if I had to take a stab at it, because I've been in boxing so long, this is so, at some point, maybe the Ramirez fight, they're going to put a trinket belt up and say, oh, this Ramirez fight coming off of a loss, and Devin Haney arguably coming off of a loss, maybe now the WBC with this newfound ranking will say this qualifies for a WBC interim belt or WBC silver belt, despite this that's not really quality championship material. If you have two guys who are arguably coming off of a loss, but this is the moves that boxing makes. So when Boxing Ego says what I said, you might want to believe me. When guys like Gervonta Tank Davis says, I don't care about these belts, pay me right, now it makes a lot of sense, because you can see the play. You can see who in the politics. People get into situations where it's like even Terrence Crawford. Terrence Crawford has done nothing at 168, but because Turkey wants and fantasizes about a Canelo and Crawford bout, which weight-wise doesn't make a bunch of sense, they're going to make it happen. And now Canelo's fighting one guy with the belt. Crawford looks like he's taking no tune-ups, and he's going to bulk up. And then his first shot at 168, Terrence Crawford will have the opportunity to become 3X undisputed. So must be nice when Crawford can be 2 and 3X undisputed by beating two people. He doesn't have to have no unifications. He doesn't have to unify. He just beat Madrimov, and he doesn't have to unify at 154 with Murtazaev, who looked great, versus Tim Tszyu. Crawford can instead have Turkey, who has his back, and say, yeah, I want you to fight Canelo. We're giving Canelo a chance to become 2X undisputed by fighting William Skull, a fight nobody asked for, bailing from the Jake Paul fight, which is a bigger fight in America, not Saudi. And then, it's kind of like rigged. It's like what you see in boxing is almost like the KC Chiefs and the referees. What people are complaining about there. Man, the referees are helping them win games. If you get with certain people and you make the right connections or have the right promoter, that's what happens. So I don't understand it in terms of how Devin is rated number one, but I do understand it because I've been in boxing and I know the play. So despite him coming off the Ryan Garcia fight where he didn't look good, and there's pictures like this out, his next fight might be for a WBC belt. And Ryan's fight, they just said that he's fighting for whatever, the WBA or WBO belt, one of those two, versus Rolly. So to sweeten the deal, boxing might try to make it look like Devin Haney and Ryan Garcia are fighting for two titles, but they're Reggie belts, right? They're Fugazi titles. Mario Barrios is the real champion. So all these secondary belts and alphabet belts, it just drags boxing down. And therefore, that's why it's too much and too confusing. There should really be one champion in each division, right? Or at least one belt per sanctioning body. But you might have a Commonwealth UK version of a belt, or international and super belts and regular belts. This is what's confusing to hardcore fans sometimes, but most importantly, casual fans, because it's like, hold on, how Devin Haney, how's he rated number 1 and his last fight looked like that? Like, it doesn't really resonate and make sense. So for me, I'm not even mad at people like Jake Paul, because they're playing the game how the game's supposed to be played, and everybody else is doing it with the politics. And it's funny because this way of thinking is archaic. It is archaic to me about, oh man, this guy is really qualified because he's a champion. You can like virtually, it's like Build-A-Bear. You can almost like build a champion and then put someone in the right set of fights, and then, you know, make all the belts available to that person and put some money behind them, put some promo behind them, and you can almost like build a champion. But then you put that person in there like in a tournament, and they might not be the rawest or the best fighter. That's why people don't trust these belts anymore. And these sanctioning companies, they got to pay these fees and all that. And to me, it doesn't really signify in 2025 that you are truly the best because you have a belt. Maybe back in the day in boxing, it probably worked like that, where the guys who had belts, Roberto Duran, Sugar Ray Leonard, Hagler, Ali, they were the most credible. You know, that was the heavyweight champion of the world. But boxing has taken this and gotten greedy and created extra belts and try to give opportunities and almost like participation trophies, where you can come off of a loss, you can come off of a suspect performance and somehow be ranked above everybody else. Especially if you pay attention, the people you're ranked in front of, it's always big names who either a big name gets these crazy rankings that don't make sense, or when they want to match the big name with somebody else that has not really a chance to beat them, you'll see their names start appearing. Like when Tyson Fury was supposed to rematch Wilder, and then he bailed out of negotiations, just like Canelo did with Jake Paul, and then he came out of left field, and we woke up and it said Tyson Fury signs with ESPN and Bob Arum and Queensberry, and he ain't fighting Wilder, he fighting Tom Schwartz. And to sell the fight, they said, oh, Tom Schwartz, this guy is ranked in 2 sanctioning bodies out of the 4. And we've never heard of Tom Schwartz ever again. But at the time Tyson Fury fought him, he was ranked. So I'm expressing how this game works and all the politics surrounding it. You could get somebody in and get them into title contention if the promoter wants, because the promoter, they have their besties, if you will, that are sanctioning bodies, and they'll make it happen and manipulate the rankings, which is what we're seeing. So again, I haven't really seen anybody on YouTube talking about this. I can't wait to see what people have to say now that Boxing Ego has made a video about it and made this into a whole topic. But finally, I will say this is, now, since no one's talking about it, do not be surprised if somehow Ryan, Devin, if they end up fighting and get past their fights, it becomes for 1 or 2 titles. Stay tuned. We unpacked. We unpacked. We unpacked. We unpacked. Coming to you live, Boxing Ego Unpacked. Yeah. We unpacked. We unpacked. We unpacked.